Let's say I want to install a package on my system. Being on Arch Linux, I would do sudo pacman-S, and let's go with OBS. That is OBS-studio. If you're on Fedora, it would be DNF. If you're on Ubuntu, it would be apt. You know the package manager you use. But let's say I want to do the same, this time with Flatpak. I would do Flatpak install and com.obsproject.studio with a capital. And to make matters just a tiny bit more annoying, if you're using a regular desktop environment launcher like you'd have on KDE or GNOME or Cosmic or basically most things out there, you're not really going to notice the difference because the name of the application is being pulled from a desktop file, and this desktop file is probably going to call it something like OBS Studio or something along those lines. Maybe just OBS or Open Broadcaster Software. But if you're like me, and the launcher that you use doesn't use desktop files, instead it uses binary names, or if you're the kind of person that likes to launch things from a terminal, now you have a bit of a problem. What is that problem? Well, on Arch Linux, the OBS package is called OBS Studio, but the OBS binary is just called OBS. But the application you get from the Flatpak isn't this one. That is com.obsproject.studio with a capital. So you might be wondering, what the hell is this stupid name, and why do Flatpaks use it? Now, if you're a Java dev or something in that same sort of realm, you probably recognize it immediately as something very similar to your package import statements. In its truest form, and this isn't the truest form, but in its absolute truest form, this is called reverse domain name or reverse DNS notation. It is a naming system based on the reverse order of a registered domain name. Now, Java is one of these cases where it's not explicitly a registered domain name because obviously you wouldn't want to go and register a domain name every single time you make a new package. It's just a structure that looks like a reverse domain name. In the case of our Flatpak example though, com.obsproject.studio, so the OBS website is obsproject.com. So this is the reverse order of that, com.obsproject, and then this studio part, that would be the subdomain, and this could be set to anything you wanted. But it is not always using the project's main website. Take, for example, Critter. The website is critter.org, but the Flatpak, that is registered under org.kde.critter. org.kde or kde.org, that is the KDE website. And this is done for good reason. This is a way to group related projects under a similar name. You know that anything that is org.kde, that is going to be a KDE project. In the same vein, we have Firefox and we have Thunderbird. This is org.mozilla.firefox. This is org.mozilla.thunderbird. You know both of these are Mozilla applications. Now, like Java, Flatpak also technically doesn't use true reverse DNS notation, but a system heavily inspired by it. It looks like a domain name, but they're not always going to be exactly the domain names that you expect them to be. And a strict notation can cause a lot of problems, especially when you don't allow for renaming. This is how you get situations like Kodi on Android still going by com.xbmc, even though they changed their name away from xbmc, I don't know, like a decade ago. Especially in its truest form, where it's based on a domain name that you actually own, the function of this is to eliminate namespace collisions. So you are the holder of that domain name. Nobody else is going to name a package in the same way as your application because they don't own that domain name. The only one that can cause a collision then is you, and if you do that, well, that's a skill issue at that point. Obviously, in something like Java, it's not actually registered domain name, so you could actually name a package in the same way as another package, so the system doesn't always work perfectly, but that's the main function. It gives you a lot more space to work with as it's less likely than just having a singular name. Throughout this video, I've mentioned Java a few times here, and the reason for that is, whilst Java didn't invent this system, it certainly is what first popularized it. maybe even more so when it comes to Android, because on Android, this is how every single package and how all the data for those packages is actually stored. Dig into your file system and you'll see everything using this notation. The funny thing about this system is that it actually predates the Internet Domain Name Standard. I feel like the only reason why it's called reverse DNS then is because the domain name standard became more popular, so this one sticking around, it had to have a name, and it was just called the opposite of the popular thing. So this was created by the UK Joint Academic Networking Team, otherwise known as JANET, for their name registration system back in the 80s. As an example, if you had something like this, uk.ac.bris.pys.as, AS is being interpreted as the host name, and then this is within the UK. If this was a domain name, it would be the opposite, where UK is the host name, and then AS is the TLD. Now, annoyingly for the engineers of the time, there was actually a transitionary period where both were being used at once. JANET style and Internet Domain Name style were both in use, and mailers and gateway sites had to have these sort of ad hoc workarounds to handle the differences, and when there were clashes, which there were, things kind of just broke a little, and they had to go and manually set a workaround for that specific name. Whilst the reason it is mostly used is to deal with naming collisions, that's not the only reason why it is being used for Flatpak, because in all seriousness, this would be an incredibly rare problem when dealing with Linux applications. I know of maybe 3 applications that are not forks of each other that make use of the same name. And those could very easily be special case. They could be very easily just have a different name or handled in a way where you're like, okay, we already have a package with that name, just call it something else. When you're dealing with Java packages or Android applications where there is millions upon millions of devs, yeah, it definitely makes sense in that case. Another reason for Flatpak, though, is actually just familiarity. Both Free Desktop and GNOME make use of this naming scheme. In the Free Desktop case, the desktop entry specification and dbus both make use of this notation, and on the GNOME side, dcomp, the configuration backend for GNOME, also makes use of it. Now, I am not the first person to note this system is incredibly user-unfriendly. Yes, it is perfectly fine for package naming and back-end stuff the user doesn't have to interact with, but when the user does have to interact with it, I hate com.star and org.star naming scheme for packages. Many people have a lot of opinions about this, and this is something people have had a problem with for a very long time. Now, you might say, oh, just fix it yourself, go submit patches to Flatpak, or go and report the problem. And this problem actually has been reported to Flatpak many, many times in the past. Here is one example from 2018. Now, the start of this thread is a whole separate problem, and that is the fact that the package names are sometimes capitalized. Like I showed you before, this shouldn't be allowed. Why is this a system you even allow to be a thing? This should be entirely lowercase. This should be a requirement to put the application as a Flatpak. It shouldn't even work without having a lowercase name. But let's look at the first reply. The whole reverse DNS naming protocol is just too unfriendly and cumbersome. I know it's kind of inspired by the reverse domain name structure seen in Android apps, but adopting that on a Linux desktop setup where people pride in using CLI more than GUI, it's a really bad idea, honestly. This protocol being used in Android makes sense because nobody uses CLI there. If Flatpak had launched with only a GUI app store for FlatHub, it would not have mattered. But on a CLI-preferred operating system, even in 2018 that wasn't necessarily the case, but a CLI in heavy use operating system, and the fact that a GUI FlatHub store is too early to even speak about is just not happening. Yet in 2018, there wasn't really integration into a lot of the stores like we have today. Nowadays, if you want to use something like the KDE store, the GNOME store, there's third-party stores, those are all available, but this is 7 years ago. As the Flatpak user base grows, the number of people detesting the setup is just going to keep growing. More people discontent with this naming protocol, better deal with it when the user base is small and forgiving. Uniformity and ease of use should be paramount in a system that is rooted in CLI. I don't know how this person learned English, because I've never seen someone use this many ellipses in 4 sentences. Now, considering the reply, this is likely a problem that has been mentioned many times. Please stop harping on the naming. It is not going to change. Flatpak is first and foremost a system to install graphical desktop apps with good integration in the desktop for installation, updates, and launching. The command line is not where it is taking its design direction from. That's the problem. That's the problem that's being raised. I think this was especially a bad take then, back when there wasn't graphical applications to interact with Flatpak. And it's still a bad take now that it is, because there are still people that interact with things based on their binary names, and that's not going away anytime soon, and I hope it just never goes away, actually. The application identifier is more than just a name used to start the Flatpak. It is also tied to things like the dbus identifier and avoidance of conflicts when exporting things to the system. This has been explained many times, and while it would be nice to have a single place to point people to for a description, my experience is that nobody will read that. Doesn't matter if anybody reads it, because it still doesn't actually explain the problem, why you have to throw away the terminal experience just for this. Because what you could do is have a simple script that gives a sensible name to the application that the user can run from the terminal. In fact, let's do exactly that. On my system, I have a bunch of these files -flatpak. Say, for example, let's go with Chatterino. This is my Twitch chat client. This is opening the Flatpak for the application. So what does that look like? Inside of my .local/bin, we have the chatterino.flatpak file. This is a simple 2-line file. It is a shell script, and it just runs the Flatpak. This is all that would need to be done to make it a pleasant terminal experience. And I've done that. Then what you do is, once you've made the file, then you go and do a chmod +x on .local/bin/chatterino.flatpak, and now you have an executable file. If you want this to be somewhere else, just make sure it's somewhere in your path, and then you can just run it from anywhere. Just do exactly this for every single one of your Flatpaks, never think about the problem again, and you fix something that is never going to be fixed upstream because there is no interest in fixing it upstream. But what do you think? Do you consider this a problem? Have you ever really thought about the naming of these Flatpaks? Did you know why they were named like this? I'd love to know. And I'd also like to know if you've also fixed your package names like I have. So anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video. If you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I was trying to think of a funny domain name, but I couldn't think of one. Yeah.